Hi there.
Hello. Got a
In a
little
sec.
confusing here with the links.
Yeah, did you were you offline for a little bit or
No, I was here.
no? Oh, okay. That's strange.
Definitely an internet issue. I had sent the first one, I think, at 5 minutes before 12 your time.
Oh, didn't show up. There was a little red statement underneath your name saying you were currently offline. So, or no internet connection or something like that.
That's strange.
Yeah. How are you?
Okay.
Good.
How was your summer?
Um, it was interesting.
Oh,
Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's been it's been strange, as I'm sure you're aware. I'm finally sort of able to get into cafes to do my writing, which has really made a big difference. Um, so work on Walk in Shadow has been moving along quite nicely. So
well,
uh,
happy
I
news.
did a vacation, that was good. So nice break.
Where did you go?
Just to visit my son. We drove from here to Winnipeg and back. So yeah, I guess about 6,000 clicks, 6,000 kilometers total, somewhere around there.
Oh,
I like driving, so it's okay.
my husband likes it too. We drove to Slovenia and back this summer and to Croatia and back.
Oh, nice. Which part of Croatia?
The coast.
The coast?
The just a little below Opatia, maybe like 150 kilometers below.
Right. Okay. But on that peninsula,
Uh,
like yeah, you went through Apatia? Yeah?
no, we came from the other side, south of
Maybe
Opatia,
on the other side. Okay.
but it
Cool.
was fun.
Yeah.
Uh, I was gonna start today with a real life Steven Erikson anecdote because I have a few of those actually.
All right.
But I think it's something I've probably always assumed it's self-understood, but maybe it needs to be said. I don't know if you remember in Opatia we had a short chat, and I was telling you about how I felt when I finished the Cripple God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were sitting at that long table outside
Mhm.
in the festival area. I do remember. Yeah.
And it was a pretty unique feeling, and I remember thinking after I was done, thinking that I really have to get to see this man. If just once in my life, I have to meet him. And then I thought, well, maybe if I can talk to him for a minute or two, but while signing a book, how much can you say? But that's the most I can aspire to,
Mm.
statistically speaking. So to be able to do this, to talk to you, to know the man behind the author a little bit, and to be known myself, that really means a lot.
Well, it's one of the values of festivals and events and uh, various sort of places where the author is invited, because then they can actually meet. Um, you can meet the readers and you can sit and relax and chat and all the rest. Sorry, I'm scratching my back with my
Wish.
with my with a paintbrush. So there we go. That's done. And that's one of the things I really value with those kinds of invitations. It's not just signing books, because signing books, like you say, it's people line up and you're signing books, and you can get maybe a minute and a half conversation with them. But the rest of the time is what I like, is just hanging around and meeting readers and meeting fans and stuff, and that's always good fun. Oh, I think we must have sat there for at least half hour, if not longer.
No, it was just 15 minutes.
Was it?
Yes. And I was really furious with the organizers because they didn't list a panel for you the next day.
Mm-hmm.
They went there and I asked them if you're coming again, and they said, no, I'm sorry, he's not coming. But their English was pretty broken, so he
Mm-hmm.
didn't know what to make of it. And then when you wrote to me later that evening that you were there and you looked for me and I wasn't there,
Oh, right.
it was really frustrating.
Yeah. 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 I mean, these are all volunteers who, who put together these festivals, and so they do what they can basically, and I've gone back there. I've done Opatia 3 times now, I think, maybe twice. I can't remember. No, I think it was 3 times. So I mean, it's a great place to be. So yeah.
Being in Slovenia this year, I met Andrzej Vodenik. He too is quite a bit a fan of
Mm-hmm.
yours. And we
Mm-hmm.
met in person for the first time. And talking to each other, we realized that that evening we were in the same room, the same panel that you attended, just a few
Really?
chairs next to each other, but we didn't know each other back then. So
Amazing.
that was
Amazing.
quite something, fate, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah.
So going forward, I'm gonna give a pretty wide spoiler warning.
Yep.
Probably people know already, but while we are talking mostly about Deadhouse Gates, it can take us in any direction. So this is a general warning for everything written in the universe. So it can go anywhere.
Yeah.
Iskaral Pust. There's a scene where he does a reading of the deck that almost tempts Icarium into snapping his neck. And there's one thing that he says that is interesting. He says renewal, resurrection without the passage through whose gate, renewal. Now, he's probably talking about Sheikh and Felicin. But since the timeline isn't clear, I can't tell if this is, him having a premonition of the future because of the deck reading, or if this already happened and he knows what he's talking about and he's just teasing people.
There's always an element to Iskaro Pust where you're not meant to be certain of anything that he says, right? That's his nature. And so as a writer, it gives me the opportunity to throw things in there that he couldn't possibly know, but he just apparently does. So there is a meta aspect to Iskaro Pust,
Okay.
in the same fashion that there is with Krupp, for example. Yeah. And it's designed to basically, or intended to throw a wrench into everybody's sort of conceptions or perceptions of all aspects of the universe, the Malazan universe. And so in that sense, I'm just having a bit of fun with it when I do it. And it's as if I've given myself permission to mess around with the metatextual aspects of the series. So I can't give you a direct answer because he's throwing things out there. And then the characters within the story have to react to it and respond to it and reach some form of conclusion regarding what he has to say, whether it's truthful or not, whether it's accurate, whether it's prophetic. I mean, the Malazan world, yeah, we've got the deck of dragons as a divination deck. And so if that kind of rule is in place, then anything goes once the deck of dragons is laid out on the table. So
the concept of resurrection with renewal, resurrection without how was it? Renewal, resurrection without passage through whose gate. Now, in order for it to be a renewal or resurrection of some sort, a part of the old Shaikh must have survived in the new one. A part that would be neither Felicin nor Drijna, but I haven't seen it anywhere. Did I miss something? Did you leave it open on purpose?
Not quite sure what you're meaning by that. I mean, Felicin experiences a kind of renewal. but also a kind of rebirth. But when she emerges into this new state of being, she's no longer alone internally, right? Drishna has also occupied her being. I can't think of there being a third player in that. I think it's the two of them.
I was thinking along the lines of the old sheikh being renewed and the new
Ah,
sheikh comes.
yeah, but that renewal's metaphorical, isn't it? Right, because it's a title that is taken on, and I don't recall if there's any aspects of the old sheikh that lingers. If it lingers at all, it's because Drishna has taken some part of sheikh with her, or the original sheikh.
I
And
think
so
there's
those
a
two
part.
personalities are more fused than Drishna would probably realize.
I think there's a part in House of Chains where Felicin is getting Sheikh is getting ready to face Tavor, and there she thinks that the old woman, the old Sheikh, she used to be a hard woman, a warrior, and she could feel her inside her. So
Good.
maybe
Okay.
through Drishna's memories, but it's
Yeah.
vague. It's the only line.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the third question about the same part, Eric was telling me at some point a long time ago that he sees Coltane as a Christ-like figure. And there have been many religious elements that come from Christianity that you have explored in unique and interesting ways, including the idea of resurrection without death. And this seems to be the same theme here, at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's the advantage, I guess, to creating a secondary world that has no connection with ours. Is that you can kind of extract real world elements, and in the process of moving them across into the secondary world, you can sort of, it's as if you've got a crystal in your hand and you want to sort of explore every facet as the light plays across it. So you manipulate it and move it around in your hand, so it's catching the light from different directions. And that's kind of how I approach any kind of theme that's going to echo back into this world. So if I'm exploring Christian motifs, I want to make sure that what I'm exploring is actually the symbolic meanings as opposed to direct literal translations. And so if we're going to think about renewal and rebirth and resurrection, which in many respects, in terms of denotative meaning, they're all kind of the same thing in one fashion or another. Then it will be a multitude of characters will experience that in some way, shape, or form. So if you think about it, it's not just Felicin. It's not just, in fact, in some ways, Coltane's resurrection is delayed and shifted, and so Duiker takes his place in that respect. But Duiker has already gone through a rebirth on the Chain of Dogs, and I think there's probably a multitude of other characters who are experiencing some form of symbolic resurrection or rebirth or renewal. So that's kind of one of the themes that's being explored in Deadhouse Gates for sure. And of course, sometimes the renewal or the rebirth is not into a pleasant place. It's not a case of the new version being an improvement on the previous version. It's simply a matter of change and the effect of change.
Well, these religious explorations are probably one of my favorite parts in general. I like the way
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I mean,
them.
yeah, religious belief is something that it's explored throughout the series in so many different ways. And in many respects, it was me wrestling with the notion of spiritualism as opposed to, quite often, religious organization. So the religious organization tends to bog itself down pretty quickly in a kind of secular concerns. So acquisition of property, wealth, all of these things then become sort of part and parcel of the organization of I guess, a physical manifestation of that religion in the form of churches and cathedrals and mosques and monasteries and all the rest. So that secular side is always drawn in there. But if you push past that, if you think of a religion that is actually born without a specific place, is actually mobile and fluid, it becomes, to me, it becomes far more powerful, because it does not have a physical locale where sanctity and holiness is focused. And so that was something I was really interested in exploring with the tradition of the apocalypse. Although ultimately, yes, it does have a temple, and the temple is the desert, Rariku. But the intention is to extend the storm beyond that. And so, the apocalypse is in the books, it's a physical thing. So it's a sandstorm, and you see it, and it's all this wind whipping up and all the rest. But that's one of those instances where in the fantasy genre, you can take a metaphor and make it real. A faith and a belief system that catches fire among people will spread like that. And it can become a sandstorm, if you will. And that's pretty hard to sort of raise walls against. It's one of those aspects of the human history that shows us that, for example, the way Christianity made its way through the Roman Empire, there was no way that the administration, the pagan administration, could stop it. There was no way of stopping it. And in that sense, it's apocalyptic, for the Roman Empire at that time. And the end comes when the first emperor proclaims himself as Christian and sanctifies the religion. And a lot of people write sort of all kinds of theses and analysis and books and stuff on the impact of Christianity on the Roman Empire. And it's fascinating. And there's many different interpretations and theories of the effects. But sort of in terms of, sort of for me, reading particular aspects of change that comes to a culture when new ideas come into place, there are some very specific instances that you can pull out. You think in terms of the burning of the Library of Alexandria as a consequence of religious fervor and zeal, and so these things are all there to sort of be plucked and sort of transposed into a Malazan world, but mixed up enough so that there's no real obvious connection between the two. That was a long ramble, but anyways.
People enjoy your long rambles,
Yeah.
included, so feel free. Speaking of religious institutions or religion as institution, something unique has been happening these days in Romania, the last detail is unique. There have been a series of undercover investigations made by reporters revealing the high-end corruption of the church leaders, the Romanian Orthodox Church. And as a consequence, the National Anti-Corruption Department is now investigating the church as an institution, as an entity, not even the leaders.
Mm.
That has to be unique, I think.
Hmm.
Bringing the church to justice.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's I think that's kind of happening kind of everywhere right now. In other words, no institution is immune to examination, nor should it be, I would think. We're here in Canada, we're dealing with this notions of what they call truth and reconciliation, which right now are almost empty words, especially here in British Columbia. And it has to do with recognizing the atrocities committed against Indigenous peoples here in Canada. Specifically in the state-run schools that removed young Native children from their families and basically imprisoned them in boarding schools throughout the country. And most of these schools were run by nuns and priests. And their primary purpose, their stated purpose, was to expunge the Native culture. And so these young children were not allowed to speak their Indigenous language. They were given, almost randomly given, Christian names. So their names were taken away as well. And many of them died. Many of them, failed to thrive in such a horrific environment. Many were beaten. And so now the graves are being found. The graves are being excavated around these schools, and people are, it's now becoming more recognized just how genocidal this entire program was. And, you can look back on it and think, well, how can people not be aware of what was going on? But at the same time, these schools were quite isolated. But I would think it's one of those instances where, beneath the surface, there is a knowledge. There is something that people are aware of, but we tend to engage in so much cognitive dissonance that we and we fill our lives up with so many other immediate concerns that all of this stuff can be happening, just around the corner in our neighborhoods, and we're kind of unaware of it, but we are aware of it at the same time. And so it's a difficult thing to then kind of reconcile and re-examine your country's own history. And so this, that may spill out in the investigations that's going on in Romania as well, is that these things are all tied to one another. They're bound together, and it's not pretty. It's things that have been done have a long-lasting legacy. And in many ways, if you think about it, the Malazan series is all about long-lasting legacies of past crimes. So it's certainly not something I was ever interested in shying away from. I wanted to sort of plunge into it and explore it, and follow those ripples through time and those echoes into the present.
Well, unlike Canada, Romania is a country that is painfully corrupt. And here, the more corrupt you are, the safer you are from law. So yes, it is unique.
Well, no, I mean, it's only a matter of degrees. It really is. There's a lot of groups, Native groups here in British Columbia, that did not sign treaties, and so they remain sovereign. But you wouldn't know it, because their rights in terms of resources on their lands are basically completely ignored. So companies will come in and log the land, strip the land, mine it, extract all the resources it chooses, and it seems as if there's almost no way to stop it. It's just extraordinary feeding frenzy, and it's it's been going on in British Columbia since this province was first formed. You know, this province is founded upon resources and the stripping away of resources, and that has not changed. And it doesn't matter which government's in power, it does not change. And it's pretty discouraging. I know my wife and I have talked quite a bit about, you know, possibly just leaving and finding somewhere else to live, because it is really depressing. We're down to under 1% of the old growth forest, and that's an ecosystem that cannot be recreated. Once it's gone, it's gone permanently. And it's not even a question of waiting 1,000 years for trees to grow. It's a unique ecosystem, and it can only survive if there already are 1,000-year-old trees. So once they're gone, that's it. It's toast. And it seems to not matter in the least what government's in power. They're all in on it, and they're all stripping this stuff away. And you know, native leaders can be subverted to the cause. You know, there's a lot of money involved here, and it's depressing. It really is.
I'm afraid that it's the same story everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't mind if you relocated to Europe. So
We've talked about it. Yeah.
speaking of that, you were saying that at least for a while you might be returning to Europe.
Yep. Yeah, the plan is next summer. The plan is I can't remember what it's called, but it's the annual festival it's in northern Spain, and that's in July, and I've been invited back to that one as well. So yeah, fingers crossed that, you know, the COVID situation balances out eventually, which it may not, but we'll see.
Not here. I'm not hopeful. I mean, there's this lethal combination between lack of education and distrust of authorities in the former communist countries. And it's terrible. I think we are at maybe 30% rate of vaccinations.
30%?
30%. We are the #1 country in Europe at mortality rate due to COVID at this point, and #3 in the world. And people still refuse the vaccines, and they're free. All you have to do is go and get it. Even intelligent, educated people, they come up with things like, you know, but big pharma and interest, and I don't trust, and stuff like that.
Well, you know, the weird thing is, you can actually complain about big pharma and you'd have a good point, right? But that's not relevant in this case. This is basic science. This is what, you know, this is about what vaccines do, which is not to prevent the occurrence of the condition, but to mitigate it. And if you get enough people who are vaccinated within a population, then the capacity for the virus to actually spread and proliferate, to spread and actually persist in the population starts to go down. It's a basic. I mean, it's so straightforward. It's so simple. But all these other aspects of you know, big pharma, or how governments manipulate and manage the particular situation, and all of these things, they're not, I mean, yeah, you complain all you want, and you may have a point, but they're not relevant to this. This is basic biology. You know, and to me, it's like, it's so much common sense that you would want to be vaccinated, not just to prevent yourself from getting sick, but to prevent yourself from killing others. You know, it just seems, you know, even if you don't think it's going to, even if you don't think it exists, COVID exists or whatever, it's just a decent thing to do. And it seems that seems to be lost in this endless argument about all this stuff and the complaints about personal freedoms and all the rest. Well, I don't think personal freedoms really extend to removing those freedoms from other people, which is what that choice does. So it's it's a mess. It's a mess.
Oh, my sister, she's quite the anti-vaxxer lately. Despite the fact that she's educated, she has knowledge, she understands how anatomy and physiology work. Her biggest question is, how do you know that I won't get second or side effects 10 years, 20 years from now? What's your guarantee? Because this is not a tested and trial vaccine. How do I know that this isn't some sort of ploy to get everybody in God knows what bad health situation?
Well, first of all, you don't know, right? You don't know what longitudinal effects. I mean, at the same time, these vaccines, people have been working on these particular style of vaccines for a long time. So they're not as new as people think. But no one can know the consequences of something that far down the line. What you can know are the consequences of COVID. So, it's which would you rather have? Something that nobody can pin down 10 years down the line, or something that could kill you in a week, or kill your grandparents, or whatever. I mean, even there, it's nonsensical. It's not a rational argument. So, I mean, it's basically fear mongering of something that is unknowable 10 years from now. We don't know what kind of state the world's going to be in 10 years. We don't know to what extent, I don't know, radiation leaking out of broken nuclear power plants and getting into all the fish stock. And we don't know the effect of that 10 years down the road. I mean, the only thing we can say right now is, yeah, that radioactive water is still leaking into the seas around Japan. But nobody really wants to talk about that kind of stuff, right? So it's basically straw man arguments all over the place on this stuff. And all kinds of people can fall into the straw man argument without being aware of it.
Well, and that's my sister who's educated. I remember reading a statistic that was made, I think, 2 or 3 years ago, that was saying that 40%, that's 40% of Romania's population still believes that the sun revolves around the earth, and that to say otherwise is a ploy against the Bible and against God.
Mm.
Now, that is a depressing thought.
Mm. Yeah. It's always struck me as strange that religion would be an excuse. Well, no, not an excuse, but no, I won't even go there. Let's move on.
Okay, next question. After Fiddler and his party fight the Graal warriors within the whirlwind, he starts thinking that this was such a pointless pursuit and pointless death, and wonders if maybe if he had told them the truth that he was just impersonating a Graal warrior, would they have been so determined in killing him. And as he thinks about these things, he hears the wind laughing around him, taking joy in the pain and the death and the blood and the violence. And then he finds himself having thoughts of futility. Later on, Felicien, she experiences thoughts of futility thinking how they didn't listen to Heboric with choosing the right food, and how they're all going to die and everything's, for nothing. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking this could have actually been a very discreet hint that Drishna is actually at Tlanimas, because futility is the main theme of the Tlanimas. That's what they think of. Mm-hmm. And then the manifestation of Drishna sand swirling, given that, they travel as sand, it was all there for us to see.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you recall, I mean, Gardens of the Moon made a point of the Talanomass and the word futility. And so as one writes further, and in Deadhouse Gates, I'm well aware of the origins of Drishna. So I will use that phrase and put it into slightly different context, but it's a mindful use of the word futility to kind of not put in the forefront of your mind as you're reading, but to sort of lodge it there in the back, so that when the revelation of Drishna's origin comes to light, it kind of all fits. It kind of makes sense now. So
I remember thinking the first time when I read it, the word futility lit up a few bulbs, but it happened once, might be a coincidence. When it happened again with Felicity, I was thinking there's something here, but I don't know what. This curiosity lingering. And the whirlwind, the dust, is that related to the Tlanimas as well, or just?
It hopefully evokes some kind of sense of similitude. That these are possibly aspects of the same thing. Early on, the idea of Tlanomass being able to fall to dust, and then sort of reform themselves, is also sort of, I mean, there are biblical Old Testament references in that respect as well, right? The dust to dust. But when everything falls to dust, ultimately, then something like a desert, which carries the sands and the dust of all these past ages and just whips them around and blows them all over the place. It is really an active metaphor for how the past can be swirling up around us all over again, even though it's reduced itself to dust and it lives only in our memories. And if you want to look at cultural conflicts throughout the world, that is what happens. The dust of the past is stirred up all over again, and the clouds, fill our vision and obscure everything we see. And those old conflicts are suddenly back among us. So yeah, it's a pretty broad use of that particular imagery. I mean, the entire novel set in the desert, so I'm using it all over the place. But I've seen this stuff here, and I don't mean metaphorically, but I've seen how a windstorm can strip the land away and reveal something that was hidden before. And so that's at work all the way through Deadhouse Gates for sure. That and it's just like the idea of cities sitting on top of older cities, sitting on top of older cities. That something like an act of nature, a windstorm, can actually change, your landscape entirely. And I mean, it's so hard to sort of keep harping on about the metaphor, but all of these things play into each other. They're all aspects of one another. And any kind of revelation of things that happen in your past where you didn't know the entire sort of details of them, and then just something present arrives that sweeps all those sands and dust away, and suddenly that past is transformed, and the ground you were standing on is no longer familiar to you. So it's kind of all woven through the storyline for sure.
It's definitely layered, like what you said about the past changing and coming, that's probably related to Icarium. That's exactly what's happening to him. The dust over his memories is being wiped and his past is revealed, only for it to get covered again. So there are many layers that go
Yeah.
there. But and indeed, what's the best place, the best setting for an enraged Tlanimas goddess, if not a desert?
Mm-hmm.
So they all come together beautifully.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next one. As hard as I have tried, I have never been able to imagine how an Eptorian demon looks like. So, do you have any sketch, or if you don't have a sketch, can you make one for us, and I don't know, maybe let the artists in the group improve it, or just give us an idea how an Eptorian looks like?
Yeah, I don't have a sketch. So I would have to go back to the descriptions and take a look. Yeah, no, I don't have anything, but I mean, if I get time, maybe I will, but I'm, it's because I've been writing for so many years, basically I'm not drawing. Writing replaced drawing, back in my 20s, and I've never really gone back. So I'm really out of practice. It used to be in high school, I was drawing. I wasn't just drawing every day, I was drawing in every class, which is, I was a useless student, too busy drawing. And so all my, all my notebooks, it didn't matter what the subject was. It was just, the pages were just full of drawings and doodles and all the rest. I remember in the 6th grade, a teacher demanded to see my social studies book. And I really feel bad about this because she opened it up and she started going through it. And after about 10 minutes, she was softly crying in her chair because, it was hopeless. I don't think there was any real information in that notebook at all. It's just drawings. So I made a teacher cry. I feel bad about it to this day.
Well, I'm sure you remember just by listening to her. You didn't really need to note it down.
No, actually, it was an act of rebellion on my part because I'd been moved out. We'd moved because we always moved. And so I was at a new school, and they had some new program at this school. And the wing of the school that I was in was all brand new. It was an open school, or an open classroom kind of system. And so they didn't know where, I was supposed to be in the 6th grade. And but they thought for the first month or so they'd stick me in the 5th grade. And I got so offended at that I just, when that class came up to teach Canadian history, I'd already been taught that the year before. So I just said, screw this. And I just spent all my time drawing.
Makes sense.
They eventually did move me into the 6th grade. Yeah.
Well, you had every right to rebel.
I think so.
The scene where Heboric touches the jade giant, he gets infected with a foreign magic, so to call it, and he talks to Felicin and he says, "Can magic thrive buried in Otataral sand? Can Otataral give birth to magic?" So I was thinking that we know what Otataral does; it negates magic, but at the same time, it must be magic itself. It's kind of like the Ouroboros concept in a sense, life stemming from death and returning to it, like a circle of life for magic. Mm-hmm. Is that how it works?
I don't know how much of that I should even give away.
This stuff coming in.
There is a relationship. There's a relationship between Otataral and magic. It's not just, they're not mutually exclusive, and they're not the opposites. Now, Cam and I explored that in our gaming, but for some reason, I don't think either of us has taken the storylines that we write in that direction, where we have somebody actually examining those aspects of Otataral. I know I didn't, and I can't think of Cam doing it either. I think even when he had the characters in the Otataro mines. I guess we both held that secret close to our chest. And neither of us has revealed the relationship between Otataro and magic. And my instincts tell me to hold on to that as a secret, as a mystery. But there's certainly something there, and it's certainly something that Cam and I worked through in our gaming for sure. It's just not shown up in the fiction.
Speaking of your gaming, Andre was asking me to deliver a question from his side. How many years did you play before you started writing?
Before we started writing the fantasy stuff?
Mm-hmm.
All right, let me go back in time here. I think it was 83. I came back from Central America, and geez, that how it worked. Boy, this is going way back. Maybe Cam has a better memory of this. I worked with Callahan in 82. And then I must have gone that year. So 83. No, that doesn't make sense. 84. Man, you know what? I'd have to go back and try to work out when the digs occurred and when Cam and I met. I'd say 83 or 84. But I don't think we tried that one game and that didn't work. But then we both ended up living in Kenora. And I was doing, we were both doing archaeological analysis. So I guess we started gaming then. And then we were living in different cities for a while there. So when he joined me in Victoria, so that would have been 4 years. I think we probably gamed total, the two of us together, 5 years at the most, maybe even 4. There was a lot of gaming. I mean, it was pretty intense because, both of us were writing short stories for the creative writing program, but I think you're basically obliged to come up with 3 short stories per term. And I think for both of us, we could have come up with 3 short stories in a month. So, you got all that time, and we just gamed and gamed and gamed. And then we were both living on Salt Spring, I guess. So that would have been 1989, 1990. And we were gaming there as well. And that was, I think it was 1990 when we started thinking in terms of, we'd already done the film script. Man, you know what? It's all jumbled in my head right now. I don't know why, but normally I can work this stuff through. But right now I'm thinking, well, when did we write the film scripts? We must have spent time even in Winnipeg writing stuff and maybe film script stuff. Because I know we sold our first script really early on, and then Gardens of the Moon was our second one. Yeah, I don't know. That's weird. I'll have to talk to Cam on this one. It's all hazy. It's all so far back now.
So 4 or 5 years approximately,
I think. And then at some point, I was running games in Winnipeg with a whole different crew. Cam wasn't there. And they most of those players became part of the Bone Hunters, or one player became Karsa Orlog. And then I did some one-on-one games with that same player, and we rolled up Scorch and Left, for example. And so we had fun with various elements. But even that seems strange that, I mean, was I actually running games while I was writing the Malazan novels? It's possible. It's certainly possible. Yeah. Huh.
Okay, this next one is a little silly, but I've seen people asking around, and I'm also a little curious. Baudin's talon is it's the talon of a large cat, not that of a bird. Yet when we think of cats, we usually think of them having claws, not talons. And there's this whole thing about talons and claws. I always figured, especially with the path to ascendancy, that the talons were, bird-like, while the claws were more feline. Yet Baudin's talon was described as the talon of a large cat. It's probably just an innocent game of words that you didn't think much of. But since there's so much confusion and this question pops out so often, I thought I would ask.
Yeah, that's probably just laziness on our part. Talon, claw. I mean, we probably use them more as synonyms than anything else. So yeah.
Okay, after pulling Fenner down, Heboric is concerned that his god is now vulnerable in the mortal realm. Yet Felicin tells him that he's looking at it the wrong way. She says, and that's one of the main themes of the series, I believe, even if it's twisted cynical by a Felicin observation, she says, the god you no longer worship took your hands. So now you pulled him down. Don't mess with mortals. Of course, she was wrong because in his heart, even though he wasn't a priest, he was still a believer, still a worshiper of Fener. But this idea of balance of power being a two-way street, that mortals can influence the divinity, the god that they're worshiping, is quite an interesting concept.
Yeah, well, I suppose it's, I mean, you see a lot of it in Greek mythology, for example, where mortals, well, I mean, not ultimately, ultimately in most of those tales, the gods come down and crush the mortals under their thumbs. But there is an aspect of interplay between them, and one can mess up the other. And I don't think even in our gaming, it never occurred to us that we would ever create a universe where the mortal is helpless before the god, because everything that we're writing about is about agency in some form or another. The capacity and the capability of taking control of your own life and fighting against those things that seek to manipulate you in directions that you don't want to go in, or it may not be good for you. So, the gods are in some respects, they're personifications of that random aspect, but they're not immune and not invulnerable to the actions of mortals. And so it's more of a, I guess, almost an analogy for, how do each of us on a regular basis deal with living in a society that possesses a collective authority that can throw you in jail. How does one manage? How does one manage to sort of cultivate a sense of independence? I don't want to use the word freedom because I think that's a loaded word, but independence at the very least, and agency, the capacity to make your own decisions and your own choices, but not at the expense of others. So these are sort of main themes that are explored, I think, in the Malazan stuff. And I know Cam and I both, we hammered away at it in terms of our storylines in our gaming as well, to force characters into choices. And even when they recognize that, all the options available to them kind of sucked in equal measure. So that was sort of some of the things we were looking at. And I, to what extent were Cam and I both struggle? I mean, we were both poor students and, we had no money. And, I mean, Patrick Rothfuss wrote, an entire novel based on having no money, so, and it sinks in, it has actually quite a deep effect upon people, and I'm sure it did upon us as well. So there's that, you're always living with that sense of with impoverishment, you're living with frustration and struggling to sort of find a way through and find a way to the other side. And if you have an ability like writing, then holding on to that ability and believing in it enough to actually be able to imagine reaching a state where you're no longer poor, and yet and yet you're doing something that you absolutely love doing, which is that's kind of paradise on earth, for all of its other difficulties. It was kind of a goal to reach towards, and so that's all going to permeate the kind of stories we're telling and the conflicts that the characters are experiencing, because you have to draw them from some kind of experience, some kind of personal experience as a human being. You can't just invent them on the fly. So in that respect, all fiction is exploring the human condition in some fashion or another, and an exploration of the human condition as written by humans. So it kind of makes sense.
The way I see it, it has two sides. There's the the don't mess with mortals side, where an individual, a character, the actions of that character can affect the god, and there are consequences. But then there's the other side of it, of influencing a god through worship, where the many, in the way they think and the way they pray for, the more philosophical side, but in the Malazan book is more direct. It actually has a real consequence. And that I actually found fascinating. It was something at least I've never thought of.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what we're getting, and what we've been talking around is, to what extent does the secular organization of a religion, reflect the god it purports to worship, and how far apart can these two things be pulled? You're talking about the example in Romania, and AP Kahneman can talk about the examples in Northern Ireland, and so if you're going to sort of impugn and punish, if you will, or at least expose the crimes of corrupt individuals within a particular organization, especially a religious one, does that by extension impugn or condemn that which is being worshipped? And of course, my response would be no, of course not. That the flaws that are being exposed are entirely human flaws. They have nothing to do with the god being worshipped. But if those are the only examples, mortal examples of the god being worshipped, then it raises other questions. And these are ones that I don't really want to go into, because they're extensive and possibly volatile. It's tough. And imagine if you were a truly devout individual within one of those organizations. How do you deal with this? How do you reconcile these things, exposing on child abuse or whatever? How do you reconcile that stuff with your faith? I have no answer to that one. I've never been in that situation, but I ponder it and I think about it, and I guess that shows up in the writing.
I actually had such a conversation with one such individual yesterday. She's well read, she's very polite, very educated, and also very, very deeply religious. And she saw these investigations and the bad reputation that the Orthodox Church is getting as an attack on her faith, not an attack on the institution, because she assimilates the two as being one and the same thing. She cannot distinguish between the faith and the belief and what she actually believes in, and the institution that runs it. An attack on the institution is an attack on God, and therefore all of Christianity is being attacked, and the atheists hate us all, and she's stuck with it.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I guess, with the anthropology background that Cam and I have, we always separate those two. I mean, one is it's secular in structure, because that's how societies structure and organize and self-organize. And once something like that is self-organized, then a whole different set of rules fall into place. And sometimes religious texts will codify some of this stuff, but in other cases they don't. And so the rules can be made up as one goes along. And then if there's a whole body of religious text from which that organization then seeks to select which ones to codify and which ones to quietly put away because they're contradictory, or they present views that are no longer acceptable within that organizational structure, then it becomes definitely a choice of the text you're looking at is actually fashioned by human hands, if you will, and has gone through filters through time. If you think of the Council of Nicaea and that kind of stuff. And I guess it would be very difficult to separate those things out, but it's interesting. I mean, the very religious people I know, and I've been very lucky in this, is they're profoundly spiritual, and they're just, in terms of as company, as people to sit and talk with, it's a wonderful experience. And so in my mind, I have to separate those two things out, and that you take a person at face value and you accept and acknowledge their faith and the impact that faith has had on their lives, and then just go from there. Because some of these institutions and organizations, well, most of them are 1,000 years old or older, and no history is pure. It's human beings are involved with it. We know it's going to be messy. So
the Greeks, they have Aphrodite, and the Hindus have Krishna, which is, if you ask me, he's more of a trickster than a Lord, God of love, but he's still the God of love. Yet in the Malazan books, we don't have the magical aspect of love, nor the warrior, nor the God of love. How did something so big escape?
I think probably I would describe it. Okay, if you look at in Greek mythology, yes, you have Aphrodite, but the pantheon is kind of it's kind of the cap on things. It's the highest, realm, if you will. But what was active probably in your communities and in your villages and your towns and with the equivalent of wax witches and healers and midwives and all the rest, were, I'm sure you're familiar with the phrase chthonic belief systems.
No.
Well, they're kind of almost, if you think of the pantheon as sort of nobility, they're peasant level belief systems, which operate constantly, regardless of whether that pantheon is full of Greek gods or the Catholic Church. I mean, the chthonic stuff continues, it persists, and it's passed probably mostly through matrilineal passing of knowledge. And it's one of the reasons probably why so many in, instances of Inquisition and witch burning and all the rest, took place, because the Chthonic belief systems are powerful, and they are the ones that will operate, like I say, regardless of that overall overarching organization of some other religion. And you can call them folk beliefs, you can call them, whatever, but they're sort of crucial to the maintenance of small groups of people who are engaged in the hardships of peasant life. And to me, and I think Cam probably agrees, or would agree, we saw those aspects in terms of love, as on that level, as a chthonic kind of a chthonic system, whereby, because love is the most personal experience of all in many respects, that personal in the sense that two people being in love with each other may well define that love in very different ways, even though they're both in love with each other, right? So it's on that level. It's on a face-to-face, locking of gazes kind of level, rather than anything that's sort of encodified and personified. I mean, how do you codify love? I mean, it's just, really? I don't think it can be done. So for us, I guess we saw that as more operative on a chthonic level, on the ground level, as opposed to pantheons and that kind of thing, because it's personal. It's the most personal experience of all. So yeah, why would you even think of something? I mean, Aphrodite had other functions, she had other purposes. So and had origins that I guess go back to sort of some of the Sumerian or Gilgamesh era and pre-Gilgamesh gods and goddesses. So Inanna and characters like that, who are all too human in their behavior. Filled just like the pantheon of the Greeks, filled with rage and jealousy and envy and all this kind of stuff. And so to describe them as gods of love, I think that's almost kind of a simplification. I don't even know if they were seen as specifically as gods of love or goddesses of love. I think there was aspects of love engaged in the worship of, in their natures. But I don't think they were exclusively that. I could be wrong, but that's not my reading of them anyways.
It makes sense. Cupid, after all, he too is
Yeah.
a deity of love. So it's a different aspect of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you have variations, right? You have spirits involved specifically with lust, or various gods for whom love and violence are intertwined. It's pretty weird stuff. And so even there, aspects of love are being sort of divvied up and parceled out amongst different spirits or demigods or whatever. So,
well, Hera herself, she's a patron of marriage, love within marriage, and protectress of women, particularly when giving birth. So that too is an aspect of love, if you think of it that way.
Yeah, maybe. But marriage back then was a very different institution from marriage now, and so we even have to ask, well, what was lost in translation here? Yeah, so yeah, don't know.
One could always argue that love is also magic. So at least I don't know, the magical aspect of love. And if there's one thing that is powerful enough to fuel any kind of magic, it would be love.
Yeah, no argument there. Have you seen Midnight Mass on Netflix?
No.
Oh, okay. Do you have Netflix?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. I highly recommend Midnight Mass. That is just one of the most beautifully written, beautifully acted series that I've seen in a long time. But if you don't like horror, stay away from it.
Well, I'll see how I can deal with it. I used to like it when I was younger. Then it plagued me with nightmares, and then I decided it's not a good idea, but I can give it a try.
Not. I mean, if
If it's too
don't
much, I'll
watch it at
stop. I'm
night.
wise enough.
What's that?
If it's too much, I'll stop. I'm wise enough to know where my limits
Yeah.
lie.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's relevant to the subject we just talked about, but I can't explain why because that would be spoilers. But it's yeah, it's very, very good.
Um, the last time we spoke, or last times we spoke, I was talking about a division in the world, as in the East and the West, and I had a distinct feeling that you did not agree with this approach as East and West. Yet, if you look from our point of view, being born here, historically, geographically, politically, we have always been, culturally, most of all, at the border between the Eastern way of seeing things and the Western one, between Europe and Asia. So from our point of view, it kind of makes sense to look at things this way. We have adopted parts in our culture, both from the Asians and from Western Europe, and it defines us in a way that is unique. So maybe being in Canada, East and West doesn't make much sense. But here it kind of does.
Well, no, it wouldn't not you. Well, yes, to some extent. But remember, Canada's a very young country, and it's had two sort of broad periods of population movement. Well, three if you count the original occupation of North America, which actually came from Europe or from Asia and maybe parts of Europe. But so yeah, I mean, you've got a general trend among pre-contact native groups, which was from east to west, and then of course when the Europeans arrived, they kind of reinforced that east to west push, but then brought themselves with it, and so that's sort of the second phase. But attitudes in the west of Canada are quite often pointed out as being very different from attitudes in the east. So, I mean, it's a big country. It's a very big country, but it's still quite young. But in your case, you know, you're talking about that whole region is just, it's where everything narrows down in terms of moving from east to west and west to east. That, you know, there are some mountain passes, but then there are some high plateaus, and this is, you know, this is where everybody moved back and forth in order to get anywhere if they were traveling overland. So it was always going to be a crossroads. And I mean, anthropologically and archaeological crossroads are wonderful places because they're this infusion of sometimes very, very different cultural mores and belief systems and practices and all the rest. And archaeologically, you can start sort of seeing the influences sort of appearing in tool making style, occupations systems and layout of villages and towns and all the rest. I mean, it's sort of, it's one of the things you look for, and that's why I suspect archaeology is such a rich subject in your country, because it is, you know, this influx, and it's not just east west, right? It's north south as well, isn't it? So it's because you have some Roman stuff in Romania, don't you?
Yes, we do.
Yeah. So you've got, you know, massive influence in coming up from the south. So yeah, I always find that interesting, and it's you know, it's a classic example of cultural appropriation, but not necessarily in a pejorative sense, although we can't really measure that effect. in terms of cultural impacts and that kind of thing. But it's what, you know, places like that, they take the best of everything that sort of arrives, and, you know, discard everything else. And that's what cultures do. That's how cultures continue to evolve, is by adopting and embracing new ideas, new ways of seeing the world, and new technologies, and various practices. And of course, sometimes a religion is carried with all that, right? So you get this influx of belief systems. And, you know, professors and scholars have spent entire careers exploring this kind of stuff, right? So I'm trying to remember the context by which I was leery of your East-West division, and I can't at the moment. So if you could,
I don't remember either. I'll think about it, and I'll.
Yeah.
I remember this thing that you had this, and you moved on.
Yeah.
You
Well,
really
you know,
liked it.
I mean, if you think of the Scythian cultures, so the steppe dwelling cultures, which came in wave upon wave, and many of these waves were waves that devoured the previous waves. You know, it was, but then their contact with Greek traders on the coast of the Black Sea, and the effect of that those settlements, those Greek colonies had on the north shore of the Black Sea with these groups. And then, you know, the hiring of Scythians as mercenaries and horse warriors and all the rest. Yeah, it's to me, it's one of the richest areas, archaeologically anyways, and culturally, precisely because it is this point of contact of some really sort of extraordinary and different, distinct cultures, all in contact with one another, and not contact in the sense of endless warfare, you know, which quite often people sort of get a bit too simplistic, thinking about these tribal movements and stuff out of the steppes as being all about warfare. I suspect most of it was about trade. And then, you know, in many ways, the group that came would come later from the east, driven out by other reasons, climate change being a big one, would then come into the areas that have been taken over by previous waves from the east. And quite often it would simply be that culture which had been busy in trade and all the rest, and becoming acculturated with all its neighbors, and sort of no longer being identical to the new group coming in, but sharing some elements. Well, the head would get locked off that, and the new rulers would come in and take over the whole practice, because a lot of what they were doing, I suspect, was driven by economics as well as bloodlines and all the rest. So people think in terms of the barbarian movements and tribal groups and all the rest as being exclusively one of either climate change or, you know, political change back in the homeland as driving these or invading groups pushing on them. But I would think economics and the desire for a better life and a wealthier life, and you know, for one's children, were also main factors in driving these groups forward. Complex stuff, but Romania is just, I mean, that history it's rife with that kind of stuff, and it's fascinating.
Folklore here is generally frowned upon, seen as some sort of useless science, and there's a particular useless science, folklore.
Well, archaeology
too.
what was, no, I'm sorry, I misheard you. What did you say? What is
folklore.
The useless science? Folklore.
And there's a particular disdain for the little everyday rituals that still survive. Most of them, they're dying right now with people not believing in these things. But if you look at these rituals, you can see underneath every Christian saint, because everything is related to Christianity, but under every Christian saint and every rite and every ritual that the people used to practice every day, you can see elements of cultures from all over the world. And I've always found that fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
They have survived despite Christianity, 2,000 years of Christianity, and they're still here.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the capacities that Christianity had in spreading out was not to stamp out what was already there, but to appropriate it and Christianize it. So in that sense, the daily practices didn't change that much. It's just the end point of your evocations and your practices shifted, right? So so in the context of, for example, protecting your house against demons, in terms of the threshold and your windows and all the rest, and all the things you do, the sprinkling of salt or whatever, that practice remains, but what you're doing there is you're keeping the devil out. So it's the same practice. It's just the terminology changes.
Right.
And that was genius on the part of the evangelical aspects of Christianity, was to simply embrace what was there and change the trappings, change the clothing, but everything else remains. And you're saying it's dying out, but I suspect it persists. It persists.
I saw it dying out in my own family. My grandmother used to hold these things when she was young. By the time I was a teenager, she no longer did them because she had a feeling that nobody cares, nobody wants to do these things. Like, there's this little ritual on Easter where she lights a fire on a dustpan, and children must hop 3 times over it while she says some sort of incantation.
Mm-hmm.
And when my grandfather yelled at her, "Why are you doing this? This is stupid. This is just pointless superstition. You always do this kind of stuff." That was the last year she did it. And
Yeah.
as the city life flourishes and the elders die in the villages, these traditions get lost. Nobody even knows they exist. Forget about following them.
Yeah.
You see them mostly in folklore books, and that's about it.
Well, at least in that respect, they're recorded. But I think this stuff, the chthonic beliefs will persist in some fashion or another. And yes, people may not even talk about it or make note of it. And if any, if it's going to be sort of attacked or derided, or why is it always the men who are doing that? Why is it, but I mean, these are ritual practices that I think are clearly passed down the female line to a large extent, probably because patriarchy has taken over everything else. And so, where is there room for those things, but on a very personal level, at the household or whatever, or in the forest out back, whatever. But I think these things can continue and can persist, and they may end up not being overt anymore. In fact, I think all through time there's good examples of them being pushed so far down that they are secret knowledge. They become secret knowledge at that point. But I think they do persist. I think they do.
I hope so.
Okay,
I think I'm going to try 2 more questions.
Okay.
There's something that Felicin thinks to herself. She says, "A god stalks the mortal realm, yet is afraid. He has power unimaginable, yet he hides." And this frailty of Fenner in the human realm was always something that didn't make much sense to me. Why would he be so vulnerable when other gods are not? And when Felicien says that he has power unimaginable, does she mean he has it when he's in his own realm only? Because he seems pretty helpless in the human realm. And his death and blood did have a lot of power, but was dying the only power that he had left to give?
Maybe, maybe. Don't forget, everything's tied to specific points of view. And so Felicien's looking through this stuff through her own filter. And that's going to change things. But in terms of Fenner's vulnerability, well, when gods are manifesting in the physical realm, in the Malazan world, they are vulnerable. And so they choose when and where, and they make sure that the environment around them is not conducive to their sudden demise. But in Fenner's case, that there was no choice involved. He was simply dragged into this realm. And so, yeah, that's a whole different kind of scenario for him. And that's partly what Borg struggles with, because he's responsible for all that. And then, once the god is there, various things sort of conspire to keep the god here in the Malazan world, in the physical realm, because I needed that god to be kept there, as you well know, having completed the series. So, yeah.
All right. A few months ago, more than 1 year ago, I think I saw an interview of you with Brittany, and she was saying, among other things, that you have a very loyal fan base. Now, I haven't been in a lot of other fandoms. I don't know how other fans behave, what is their loyalty to their chosen author, but you must have friends in the field who probably have their own fan bases, or at least knowledge of it. Would you say that the Malazan fandom is more loyal than other fandoms? And is this loyalty a blessing or a curse, or both at the same time sometimes?
No, I can't speak for fandoms of other series, fantasy series, or any other series, or any other books. So there's no way to sort of compare and contrast. I think loyalty is just a thing that happens, or not, depending on the reader. But I think what we do see is, and we've seen this throughout the internet, but the emergence of tribes, and how the tribe defines itself is the means by which it embraces or excludes outside points of view. So I'm sure there's anthropologists out there right now, cultural anthropologists, who are busy studying the tribal manifestations online tribal manifestations, so that they're not physically in one place anymore, and in that sense they're not bound to the same physical restraints and limitations that tribes used to be bound to. But the borders are all there, they're just virtual, and they're patrolled by these tribes, and it's a phenomenon, and I'm sure it's being studied and examined, and it's pretty hard for anybody to really sort of make any definitive conclusions or commentary on it, because if you're critical, then all the tribes turn on you, and if you're all embracing, then there's going to be a gotcha moment at some point. So I think what's happening is public figures are finding themselves walking a minefield when they engage in this stuff, and it's just the nature of the environment that we find ourselves in. And so in that respect, I don't see any kind of real. I can't see a distinction between the levels of fervor between one tribe and another. Tribes are tribes. So.
How about it being a blessing or a curse?
Well,
But you
yeah.
don't have to answer if you don't want to. That's okay.
No, I mean, I'm appreciative of people who get something out of our books. I mean, it would be churlish not to be. I'm greatly appreciative of that, and their enthusiasm and their excitement. I mean, that's those are rewards for the writer, every writer. At the same time, I suppose for some writers, it really, maybe for every writer, it places a pressure upon them. But at the same time, we're kind of used to pressure because we do that on ourselves anyways, as writers. In order to keep writing, we need that pressure in some form or another. And I've always been aware that, we're kind of in a conversation where the reader, for me anyways, the reader is a participant in that conversation. They're not simply a witness. So, and I want to maintain that level of engagement in some fashion, but primarily through the books, the stories that I'm writing. And so I acknowledge that they will have expectations, and that's not a problem. Of course, they should have expectations, because that's part of our unwritten agreement, in them to read my books or whatever. There will be expectations, and that's something I have to be cognizant of, and doesn't mean I'll always fall in line, and I may set traps just for fun, but as long as everybody sort of takes it as something to be enjoyed and not taken too seriously, in the final analysis, then we can all be engaged in all kinds of conversations and throwing expectations back and forth. And I guess a part of me always wants to just tone down the level of seriousness. These are just books. They're just books. And it's just a story. And hopefully, if you enjoyed experiencing that story, reading it, then that's really cool. By all means, share that, and if you didn't enjoy it, share that as well, and provide reasons and all the rest. It's all cool, but it's the extent to which these kind of opinions on what you like as an audience, as a reader, as a viewer, can become politicized so quickly that that's kind of unfortunate, because that need not be the case. That we can be a lot more relaxed about all of this. And the irony is, when I hang out with other writers at conventions and stuff, we're all relaxed about it. We're perfectly relaxed. So, that level of, that sense of competitiveness is just, it's not there. It's not there among the writers.
Well, the relaxation, I do understand. My father was is, but he's not in the field active anymore, a really big name in the musical folklore around here, and at least in music it still has a power. He was a VIP. Having his name in college was a curse. Everybody used to ask me, are you his daughter, and what's he up to, and what's his next project, can I get to meet him? And I got to hang around with other big names in the industry. I basically grew up with them, and everybody was so awed about these people. They are so amazing. And I used to say, Christ, they're just people. They're like anybody else. And some of them are actually downright unpleasant. So what's the big deal? So
Yeah.
I get the relaxation.
Yeah.
However, my question was more along the lines of the responsibility that a public figure, an author in this case, whether he likes it or not, has to take or is forced upon him for the actions of the fandom. That
Um,
can be a curse and a blessing, I suppose, depending on circumstances.
well,
I mean, nobody has the power to control tens of thousands of people with a word. That's insane to even imagine. Yet people claim it to be real. And how do you feel being on the other side of this?
well, yeah, I mean, I can't, there is no way to reasonably take responsibility. That is so far beyond, my capacity. Um, in terms of behavior of people who are, I guess in some way or another acting in the name of, they think they're acting in the name of these books or whatever. And I would count it, no, they're not. That the books are actually not relevant to the conflict, and that if you were to analyze the conflict, it's about other things. Whether that may be a pissing contest, or it might be turf defending, or imagined gatekeeping and all this kind of stuff. There are no gates. It's entirely invented in the head. And so that's what the conflicts are about. And no other person is responsible for that except for those who are engaged in that conflict. It's their responsibility. It's not.
Oh, I totally agree. I was wondering, how does it make you feel seeing how you're so helpless to have any control over what people say or do, yet the claim is the author sicked his fans, the author is like this because the fandom is like that, and you're completely helpless against these things. And I was wondering how, we are the fans, we see it from our side. As the author, you must have a different perspective. I would feel frustrated in that same situation.
um you know what frustration is like? Frustration is like, you have inside this little tin can full of gasoline, and it's the fuel that you're supposed to be using for your whatever. um, Writing your books, uh, composing a poem, being a good parent. It's your fuel. And what frustration is throwing a match into that can, because it just burns it up. It burns it all up, which means it's not, that fuel's not going to the right things. And I suspect most artists, and maybe other creatives of all kinds, you have to learn fairly quickly that frustration is, it's not a useful experience, and you have to fight against it, because all kinds of things can end up frustrating somebody. You don't have to be an artist to be frustrated, and if you've experienced frustration, which we all have, we know it takes you nowhere. It tires you out, it wears you out. And if you continue to sort of feed it, it becomes bitterness, and that's even worse. So I guess I'm not prepared to be frustrated, because it's not a useful feeling to have, because you're right. I mean, if I were to sort of embrace it, then you feel helpless before it, and then you get despondent, and then you just sort of want to throw up your hands and go live in a cave somewhere. So I can't really, I can't be engaged on that on an emotional level. I just can't. You know, we all have, a certain capacity, and then we go past that capacity, and that's bad. And so I need to sort of acknowledge my limitations, and I really can't engage in that stuff. I just can't.
Makes sense. Fair enough. It's probably the only way to deal with it.
Yeah, and I mean, it's been a while, but I've not sat and talked with other writers within the genre, in quite a while. But maybe the next time I do, I'll throw it out there for discussion. We'll see what the other writers are saying,
That
and
would be
hope
an
nobody's
interesting
recording the
conversation.
conversation.
Sorry?
And hope
Oh.
nobody's recording the conversation.
Well, it would be an interesting thing to witness.
Mm.
Okay, this is it for tonight.
Okay.
Today for you. I was wondering, given that things weren't really right before, at least not for me, would it be all right if we schedule these interviews every 2 weeks or so?
Probably, yeah. Just stay in touch, and I'll let you know if something comes up at this time. But I think generally, I normally don't go to the gym on Fridays, but I have to this time, so that's why we have to sort of cut this short. But Fridays are usually relatively clear. Yeah.
Great. So it was fun. It felt like coming
It was
back
rambling,
home.
wasn't it?
Well,
It was very rambling.
we
Yeah.
love your rambling and your willingness to walk the minefield. Everybody appreciates it. So
Oh no, everybody doesn't appreciate it. You're wrong there.
most of us. Okay, let's put it most of us.
Alrighty.
All right. Have a nice
Yep.
day and enjoy your session at the gym.
Thanks. Have a good night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.